The operating room corridors at Dallas Methodist Hospital were always restless. Under white lights, nurses ran back and forth. Doctors responded to urgent calls. But tonight was different. The situation in Operating Room 3 had caught everyone's attention. Dr. Richard Cole was a 46-year-old chief of surgery. He had been working in cardiac surgery for 15 years and was one of Texas's finest doctors. He had saved thousands of lives with his hands. But tonight, after putting on his gloves, there was a strange feeling inside him. Dr. Cole, Nurse Jennifer handed him the file. 42-year-old male patient, massive myocardial infarction, emergency intervention required. Richard looked at the file. Mike Stevens, farmer, lives outside Dallas. Standard information. But something was missing. The patient hadn't been brought to the operating room yet. "What's the patient's history?" Richard asked. According to his wife, he started having chest pain this morning while working in the field. Initially thought it was normal fatigue, but when the pain increased, his wife called an ambulance. Richard nodded. Heart attack at 40, usually caused by stress, poor diet, or genetic factors. But there was something different about this patient. Even though he hadn't seen him yet, he felt like he knew this person. The operating room door opened. The patient was brought in on a stretcher. When Richard looked at the patient, his heart stopped. Those facial features, that strong jaw, brown hair. 20 years had passed, but he could still recognize him. "Dear God," Richard murmured to himself. Nurse Jennifer looked at him. "Is there a problem, doctor?" Richard didn't answer. He looked at the patient's right arm. There was a tattoo there. 2nd Infantry Division, Afghanistan, 2003, Semper Fi. He remembered that tattoo. He remembered every detail of it. Mike Stevens, Private Mike Stevens. That night, in the dark hills of Afghanistan, he was the man who saved his life. Richard's hand trembled. 20 years ago, that young soldier had risked his life to save his wounded commander. That commander was Richard. Back then, he was Lieutenant Richard Cole. "Doctor, the patient's condition is critical," the anesthesia technician warned. "Heart rhythm is irregular." Richard pulled himself together. Right now he wasn't in the past, he was in the operating room. A man was dying and he needed to save him, just like Mike had saved him 20 years ago. "Let's begin," Richard said. "Nobody dies tonight." The surgery began. Richard's hands were experienced, but his mind was in Afghanistan 20 years ago. 20 years ago, March 2003. In Helmand Province, Afghanistan, at a small base. Lieutenant Richard Cole was a 26-year-old young commander. That night there was a reconnaissance mission. A 12-man team would go up to the hills to monitor enemy activities. "Private Stevens," Richard had called to Mike that night, "you and Johnson will advance from the side slope. Don't break radio contact." Mike Stevens was a 22-year-old fresh soldier. He had only been with the unit for 6 months, but he was brave and reliable. "Yes, sir," he had said. "We'll be careful." The reconnaissance began at 2300 hours. The silence of the mountains was broken only by the sound of wind. As Richard advanced with his team, fire opened from the opposite side. "Ambush! Take cover! Take cover!" Richard shouted, but it was too late. A bullet hit Richard's leg. He fell to the ground. Blood loss had begun. "Lieutenant down! Lieutenant down!" Voices came over the radio. Richard was beginning to lose consciousness. Bullets were flying around him. The enemy was approaching. At that moment, Mike Stevens came running from the side. "Sir, hold on! I'll get you out of here." "Leave me, Stevens. Save yourself." "We don't leave anyone behind, sir. No man left behind." Mike carried Richard on his back. Carrying his 110-pound commander, he walked 3 miles under a hail of bullets. Richard sometimes lost consciousness, sometimes regained it. Every time he opened his eyes, he saw Mike's determined face. "Hold on, sir. We're approaching the base," Mike was saying breathlessly. Richard was taken to the hospital. His leg was saved. Mike was the hero that night. But Richard's transfer came. To a different unit, then to university, to medical school. He never saw Mike again. "Dr. Cole! Patient is going into fibrillation." The nurse's voice brought Richard back to the present. Richard looked at the machine. Mike's heart was about to stop. The defibrillator was prepared. "Clear!" Richard applied the machine. Mike's body jumped, heart rhythm returned, but it was still critical. "We're doing a bypass," Richard said. "This heart will keep beating." During the 3-hour surgery, Richard thought only one thing. That night, Mike had saved his life. Now it was his turn. The surgery was successful. Mike's heart was beating strongly. As Richard was taking off his gloves, Nurse Jennifer approached him. "Excellent surgery, doctor. The patient is lucky." "No," Richard smiled. "I'm the lucky one." The next morning, Mike woke up. He'd been moved from intensive care to a regular room. Richard went to visit him. "How are you feeling, Mr. Stevens?" Mike was tired but awake. He looked at the doctor. Something seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Better. Thank you, doctor." "You saved me." Richard smiled. "Actually, you saved me a very long time ago." Mike was confused. "I don't understand." Richard rolled up his sleeve. There was a tattoo on his arm. "2nd Infantry Division, Afghanistan, 2003, Lieutenant R. Cole." Mike's eyes widened. "Lieutenant Cole? Is it you?" "Yes, Mike. I'm the commander you saved that night." Mike closed his eyes. Tears began to flow. "God, sir, you ... I've been thinking about you for 20 years, Mike. You saved my life that night. Then somehow our paths separated." Mike nodded. "I always wondered about you too, sir. I heard you had been transferred." "I studied medicine." "That night you didn't just save me from bullets, Mike. You gave me a reason to live. Every day as I walk through hospital corridors, I remember that night." The two men looked at each other silently. 20 years later, the roles had changed. This time, Richard had saved Mike's life. "How's your family?" Richard asked. "I have my wife, Susan. We have 2 children, 16 and 14 years old. What about you?" "I never married. I focused on my work. Maybe after what I experienced that night, I learned how fragile life is." Mike looked at Richard. "Sir, that night I was just doing my duty." "No, Mike. That night you showed humanity. That's what they mean by no man left behind." 3 days later, Mike was discharged from the hospital. But now his friendship with Richard had begun. Richard visited Mike's farm. Susan and the children welcomed him. "Are you Mike's former commander?" Susan asked. "Yes, and you're the wife of the man who saved my life." Susan broke into tears. "Mike never forgot that night. He always talked about you." Mike's 16-year-old son, Tommy, approached Richard. "Is my dad really a hero?" Richard knelt down to the child's level. "Son, your father isn't just a hero. He's the bravest man I've ever seen in my life." Tommy looked at his father, filled with pride. That day they had dinner at the farm. Mike told Richard how he started farming. "After the military, I didn't know what to do. I struggled with PTSD, but touching the soil, growing things, it healed my soul." Richard listened. "I found healing in medicine too. Every surgery is a chance to save a life." "Sir," Mike paused, "I'm so happy that I was able to save your life that night. But then your transfer. I always wondered, I thought you had forgotten me." Richard shook his head. "Mike, I never forgot you. Every success in my career is based on that night. You gave me a second life." Driving home that evening, Richard sat in his car thinking. For 20 years he had searched for Mike on the internet and military records, but he could never find him, and fate had brought them together in a hospital operating room. His phone rang. They were calling from the hospital. "Dr. Cole, there's an emergency surgery. Can you come?" "I'm coming," Richard said, but this time it was different. As he entered the operating room, he could hear Mike's voice. "No man left behind, sir." Richard smiled. Now he wasn't just a doctor. He was a man who had once been saved, and now saved others. 6 months later, Mike had completely recovered. He and Richard met every weekend, sometimes at the farm, sometimes at the hospital. Their friendship had been revived after 20 years. "Sir," Mike said one day, "I owe you something." "Nonsense, Mike. You already owe me your life." "No, something different. When I saved your life that night, I actually saved my own life too. Richard was confused. What do you mean? While carrying you that night, I made a promise to myself. If I survived this hell, when I returned home, I would protect everything valuable. I would start a family, be a good man. You gave me the reason to save my life. Richard's eyes filled with tears. Mike, ... That's why I married Susan. That's why my children exist. Every beautiful memory I have is based on that night. The two men hugged each other. War Brotherhood was still alive after 20 years. You know, Richard said, maybe I should get married too. Mike laughed. Susan has many friends. A year later, Richard got married. Mike was his best man. He had met and fallen in love with Susan's friend Jennifer. The ironic thing was, Jennifer was a nurse who worked at the hospital. Mike gave a speech at the wedding. Richard and I met 20 years ago on a battlefield. That night we were both different people. But that night we learned that you don't leave any person behind. Today, Richard marries Jennifer, and none of us are left behind. Everyone was crying. Richard also gave a speech. Some friendships are born on battlefields. Some are revived in operating rooms. Mike didn't just give me my life. He taught me what life means. 2 years later, Richard had a son. He named him Mike. Mike Stevens also became the godfather of Richard's son. This child, Mike said, holding the baby, is both your and my legacy. Richard smiled. No man left behind, Mike. No man left behind, sir. And both of them knew this wasn't just a military saying. This was a life philosophy. Protecting people, caring for them, never abandoning them. 5 years later, Richard became chief of surgery. Mike's farm grew. Their children went to college, but their friendship never ended. Every Veterans Day, they went to the memorial together. They remembered their friends who died in Afghanistan, and every time they said the same thing. They weren't left behind either. We carry them in our hearts. This story shows us that true friendship transcends time. Mike Stevens didn't just save his commander that night. He showed what friendship, sacrifice, and never giving up meant. And Dr. Richard Cole. He wasn't just a doctor. He was a man who continued his life-saving mission for 20 years. No man left behind. No one is left behind. This isn't just a military saying, it's a principle of humanity.